The World Series is now 2 games in, and it may be what you expected. It may not be what you expected. We're going to talk about what things have gone right, what things have gone wrong for both teams. And although it might have been a lackluster college football weekend, it was still a college football weekend. So you know that there were a lot of games that might have been an upset, and there were some games that, well, they were closer than they should have been. And UFC 308 came and took place in Abu Dhabi. And of course, I'm going to have to talk about that because, well, I love everything mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Matthew Raridan, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights, where I am your host, Matthew Raridan, and with me here today is none other than Ed Smith.
Welcome, y'all.
And I may be a little bit under the weather, but I'll tell you who's not under the weather, and that's the Los Angeles Dodgers, as they have now taken a commanding 2-0 lead in the World Series, and nothing feels better than that. You are going to be going on the road to New York. You do have a nice cushion because you don't know how things are going to take place when you're on the road. Look at the shoes that the Yankees are in. They're down 0-2 against the Dodgers, and it hasn't been super dominant by the Dodgers, but it's been a lot of back and forth. But the Dodgers just seem to have that slight edge. Would you agree with that, Ed?
Absolutely. It's when you take out the top three of both teams, you actually see what the rest of the roster is made of. And in that in that rest of the roster, it's just an advantage for the Dodgers. You've got your Will Smiths, you've got your Toscar Hernandez, you've got all these guys that are just a step above where the Yankees are outside of their big three.
Yeah, it that lineup is so deep for them, and so is their bullpen. Their bullpen has really been what's helped get them there. In addition to their offensive bats, you've got players like Tommy Edman that's coming out of nowhere. Even Kike Hernandez, he always provides that spark for the Dodgers. But there was one player that provided the ultimate spark in game one, and that was the game winner grand slam, first time ever in World Series history, none other than Freddie Freeman, which we talked about on this show. Was Freddie Freeman is still Freddie Freeman. You may hear of the Shohei Ohtanis, the Mookie Betts, because they are the big stars on the team, or even in the series alone with the Juan Sotos, the Aaron Judges. But Freddie Freeman, don't forget just how great of a player he is, and he proved just that with a walk-off grand slam to win game one. Nothing really gets better than that, but of course it came with drama, and that drama being Aaron Boone bringing in Nestor Cortez, who hadn't pitched in 36 days. So there was drama there. Why did he make that decision? Uh, I mean, Ed, what do you think happened there?
For all the analytics, there is a sense of gut feel when it comes to managing. And Aaron Boone just had a gut feel that Cortez not being on the mound in high stress situations throughout the entire playoffs gave him an edge and when going up against the top of the Dodgers lineup. Now it worked out for the first portion of it, and getting Otani to pop up. Uh, it was a high leverage situation that he brought him in on. Eventually got to the bases loaded, and first pitch going back to the well that got Otani out. Freeman saw that, and he was sitting dead red in inner half of the plate. That thing went 409 feet to right center field. It was very reminiscent of Kirk Gibson in the '88 series, just sending everybody home game one in such a frenzy that it actually carried the Dodgers to a 5-game series win against the Oakland A's that year. We're well on our way to the same thing this year.
Yeah, there's nothing like momentum that helps you win a World Series like that. And one of the key stats that kind of stood out to me in game one, the Dodgers, of course, winning 6-3 with that walk-off grand slam because they were losing, uh, is the Yankees had the most hits. They had 10 versus the Dodgers 7, but they left 11 runners on base. And this is the World Series. You can't do that. Dodgers, on the other hand, only left 4, but the Yankees, 11 on base. You're not going to win the World Series doing that. So when you have a lineup full of stars like the Yankees have, you just can't be making those mistakes. So leaving those runners on was a big deal. And well, with that momentum from the walk-off grand slam, how was it really going to be going into game two? Well, let's talk about game two because Yamamoto, the Dodgers' other biggest acquisition in the off season, where they spent a lot of money. Uh, how was he going to do? Well, he did amazing, only giving up one hit, and that being a solo home run to Juan Soto. 7 very strong innings, and you could look at how his season went, and you could just totally disregard anything about that because this World Series start and what he did is worth it with that checkbook, right, Ed?
Oh yeah, I mean when you're talking about shelling out more than $250 million for a pitcher from overseas, you need some return on your investment. And his first start in the World Series seems like it was worth it to me. As long as he keeps going this way, there's no reason why that contract was not worth what the Dodgers shelled out for him. Giving up only one hit in 7 innings, which 7 innings for a starter for the Dodgers is a rarity at this point. Dave Roberts is so in love with making moves and over managing bullpens when it comes to the playoffs that having a starting pitcher left out there until the 7th inning was just mind boggling to me. And Dave Roberts still pulled him with nobody on base. I, I just don't get it when it comes to that portion of it. But we've talked about that over and over again on this show. But as far as Yamamoto, he really proved why they went and got him from the Japan leagues and brought him over. It was a great pitching performance, only giving up the one hit, which was indeed a home run by Juan Soto, but one hit versus, you know, really keeping that Yankees lineup down. There is an old saying in baseball that your momentum is your next day starter. Well, guess what? Yamamoto was the ultimate momentum after game one heroics.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Yamamoto that proved to be worth the investment, bringing them over from another team. Mookie Betts, who has been there for several years now, they also got in a trade from the Red Sox. Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman's just on a tear right now, hitting another home run. Just all these guys are proving to be that there was a reason why the Dodgers got him and to show up when it matters most. And they are doing that indeed. But this game, although we talked about all the highs with the Dodgers, Yamamoto only giving them one hit, really being that return on investment, there was still a little drama at the end of the game. And that was a bases loaded jam in the ninth inning, and the Dodgers got lucky to get out of it and escape with a 4-2 victory. So that was humongous. The Yankees did shrink their left on base down to 6, but it was kind of hard to do when you only had 4 hits in the game. So the Dodgers pitching did what they needed to do, but it was a little scary. Palms were sweaty at the end of that game.
Definitely. And the Dodgers proved that they can get out of that high leverage end of game bases loaded scenario where the Yankees could not.
No, they could indeed. They need to make some adjustments. They're going back home, so hopefully those proper adjustments have been made for them, because if not, this Dodgers can win in a clean sweep. So because they have everything that they need to do that. But if the Yankees do make the adjustments, we could be talking about a whole new series here. So there's only one way to find out, and that is to tune in and watch more of the World Series when that happens. And we will also be reporting when that happens as well. So stay tuned for that. But now that that's done, let's talk about college football this last weekend and kind of our thoughts on this weekend, because we talked a little bit about it on our Saturday special. This wasn't an eye popping type of college football weekend. I love football, college football, and NFL more than the next guy. But this was not your ideal. I'm circling the calendar this weekend because it really wasn't that big of a weekend. Some of the top teams didn't play, and it just wasn't super entertaining. But it's still college football. It's still NFL football. So there. I'm still tuning in. And one of the games that I had my eyes on that we talked about on here was LSU and Texas A&M. And the first half was kind of going how I was expecting. I LSU looked like more of a complete team. I thought Brian Kelly coached the team well the first half. They went into halftime leading. Well, it's a tale of two halves, isn't that right, Ed? Because it changed completely. LSU looked like they didn't know how to play football anymore, and they got a little too comfortable. Probably had a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at halftime celebrating, and came out and just lost the game. I mean, what were your thoughts on that? Did you expect that to happen after halftime?
I certainly didn't expect it because I typically don't expect A&M to win these high profile games because as we talked about on the Saturday show, I haven't seen them do a lot of high profile game wins over the past say 10 years since Johnny Manziel left. It's been a while since we've seen a game where A&M goes in and is basically turns the game over into their favor and just smushes an opponent, whether it's at Kyle Field or any place else. So that was my takeaway on it. But for LSU side, Garrett Nussmeyer, my goodness, you cannot just hand the ball over in high leverage situations like that and expect your team to win. It just fueled the fire that Texas, after A&M had gotten a little bit of momentum. Garrett Nussmeyer throws another pick, and A&M's just rolling at that point. Wouldn't you say that was about how it went?
Yeah, nothing throws off your momentum like an interception. You can look at the stat sheet, and who cares that you had 400 plus passing yards? You had three interceptions, and key interceptions, I might add, that gave Texas A&M all the chances to not only get back in the game but to ultimately run away with the game. So this was a big game because we talked high on LSU, and not so high that they're a national championship caliber team, but I felt like they were more complete. And we actually have seen a better defensive LSU team than we have recently, and they're doing this without their star defensive player in Harold Perkins. So I wanted to add that on our Saturday special, but I'm going to talk about it now. So the fact that they were able to do that is a big deal, and it was looking great up until halftime. But when you give them that extra opportunity that they didn't have by throwing the interceptions, they capitalize on it. So here's Texas A&M now, overall 7-1, lost their first game. They've won every game since. They're 5-0 in the SEC. But how much of their success, Ed, is because of Mike Elko? Because no disrespect to the Aggies, but they don't have a lot of stars on their team. Shoot, their quarterback situation is something to keep an eye out on, but they're getting the job done. And is that Mike Elko?
That is Mike Elko. And just like we were talking about managers in baseball having a gut feeling about something, Elko has had a great gut feeling when it has come to his polar opposite quarterback situation. You've got Connor Wegman, who is a drop back guy. Has a little bit of escapability, and then you've got Marcel Reed, who is very escapable and can throw a couple of passes to keep the defense honest. And knowing when and where to use both of those guys, that is pure Mike Elko. And since Mike Elko came to College Station, he has really taken in what Texas A&M is and what it should have been for the whole Jimbo Fisher fiasco. A&M is not a football program that needs to be based upon glitz and glamour and who's making more money and NIL and stars and all this stuff. No, you're out in the woods and you're hunting on the weekends and you are biting ankles trying to get the ball carriers down. That is Mike Elko's style of coaching. That's the type of teams that he puts on the field, and that is a perfect fit for Texas A&M. Now, me as a Texas fan, as you can see, uh, that scares me to death, but that is exactly what Texas A&M needed. They needed that gritty type of coach, not one that's all about high flying offenses and no defense.
Yeah, so I got a question to ask you. So we saw them lose week 1 to Notre Dame.
Uh-huh.
Then week 2 we saw Notre Dame lose to NIU. So who do you think's done a better job getting their team back to where they need to be? Marcus Freeman or Mike Elko?
Well, to carry down that path, NIU just lost to Ball State, so there is
Also a
that.
hard university.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I would say it's a harder road to hoe with an SEC school versus a Notre Dame schedule. No disrespect to the ACC programs that they are contracted to play, even though they're independent. To get your team on track and have the physicality and mental toughness that it takes to be a week to week team in the SEC is totally different than Notre Dame going and dropping 7 touchdowns on Navy. It's just different. So I think Elko has done a much better job than Marcus Freeman getting off the canvas.
Yeah, and if you're going to lose a game, losing your first game is probably best. Well, granted, your second game too is not that bad, but to show that you've made the necessary adjustments since then, it really shows a lot. So I'd agree with that with Mike Elko and the SEC being in there. It's a dog eat dog world. So the fact that you were able to come back after your first loss and continue to dominate has been impressive to see. So shout out to Mike Elko and Texas A&M program. But uh, continue to talk about the SEC here. We had a premier SEC matchup that no one thought was going to be a premier SEC matchup, and that was the Texas Longhorns and Vanderbilt. And this was closer than probably you hoped for, but you came out with the win. Am I right?
Yeah, we came out with the win 27-24, and when coming off of the emotional loss against Georgia last week, going on the road, there was a lot of things stacked against Texas, and they came out the first couple plays. It didn't look good because there was the tip pass for an interception from Quinn Ewers, and Vandy cashed it in for a touchdown. But after that, the gears started turning and things were rolling. But as we got further and further along in the game, it felt more like Texas was playing against two teams versus one. I'm not one to typically harp on the officiating as a crew that is against a team, but my goodness, I have not seen that many holding calls against any SEC teams this season. And one of them was just the tight end fell down on a guy and he was called for holding. It's It was ridiculous to me, but it is what it is. Referees are going to referee, and that's what it is on that. But as far as uh, the Longhorns playing Vandy, Diego Pavia, and that team is a scrappy, good football team. I don't know what retreat with Aaron Rodgers, Clark Lee went to in the offseason, but he came back and changed this entire program from top to bottom. And it is a grit fest with Diego Pavia at the helm. I was almost starting to think that it was a matter of the SEC is wanting Diego Pavia to be like this Patrick Mahomes type character, where no matter what happens, Diego Pavia has a say in it, and you know, not even the ball snapped and there's a flag being tossed out for pass interference. The great and powerful Diego Pavia will tell us where to set the ball. That type of thing. It really seemed that way, especially after the Alabama victory that they had. They were trying to do the same thing to Texas, and they did fall short. But they, after a furious comeback in the second half. But on the flip side for the Longhorns, their defense came to play. They forced more turnovers than what Vanderbilt got. And the turnovers that Texas did give up, I think, was more on Quinn and his mechanics. I will harp on it again and again. Poor arm angles and poor mechanics lead to tip passes with Quinn Ewers, and that led to two interceptions that led to 14 points for Vanderbilt. And that's not going to cut it going through the rest of the schedule, especially once we get down to Kyle Field at the end of this season.
Yeah, I know our very own David will hate me probably for this, but I'm not saying he is. So I want to make that clear. But Diego Pavia, the way that he plays and the passion that he has, it reminds me shades of Tim Tebow at Florida. This is a guy who just wears it all on his sleeve, and he's playing for Vandy. You know Vandy's we know Vandy's reputation as far as SEC football school, and they have defied that expectation this year already. But that's because of Pavia and the way that he plays. So I have to give credit where credit's due, and the
Mhm.
way that he plays is a lot like how Tim Tebow was at Florida. He left it all out on the field. Some games weren't pretty. They weren't. I mean, Pavia had turnovers yesterday, two interceptions, but he still went with a bang. He still was fighting until the clock hit zero. And I love seeing that grittiness and that toughness, especially against a Texas school, which is regarded as one of the best programs in college football right now. So I got to give this Vanderbilt program some credit for what they've done so far this year. But yeah, Texas and their defense, they need to, regroup and get back because it's only going to get tougher and the season's going to continue to go with or without you. So once they get things back together, Texas hopefully will be back on top to where they need to
And
be.
and luckily, Texas is going into a bye week, but coming out of the bye week, we do wind up with Kentucky, then Arkansas, and then Florida before we get to A&M. So at the start of the season, that looked like a weaker schedule, but uh, with as crazy as this season's been already, I look for some fireworks.
Yeah, you can't take anything for granted, especially in the SEC. So that needs to be noted. So just because you're playing a Florida team that's probably going to fire their head coach, sorry, David, doesn't mean that they can't put up a fight. So we'll see once that happens, and I'm sure we'll have some friendly wager on here between David and Ed. But it's all fun and games. It's all love. So Texas, they picked up the win, much needed win, whether the scoreboard was 3 points or 30. A win is a win. So they got it. They're going into a bye, get that rest, come back refreshed.
And one last thing, as a Texas fan, I will say this: if you told me that we were going to go into this bye week with only one loss, and that one loss was to Georgia, I would have taken that all day long. However, the eye test matters. And that's what I'm concerned with going into the second half of the season.
Yep, the eye test for sure. So, um, over to the Big Ten now. Illinois came in, gets Oregon over in Autzen, and wasn't much of a matchup. Ducks pulled out the win, 38-9. And what I've been impressed with the Ducks is the last 8 quarters, the Ducks have only given up one touchdown. And I love that because we're in the middle of the season right now where that is important. It's one thing when it's the beginning of the year, you're playing a non-conference game. Well, no, you're playing conference games now, and I know Purdue isn't that strong of a team, and then Illinois being a ranked opponent, being able to only hold only one touchdown in the last 8 quarters, I was very impressed with. Dylan Gabriel still playing clean football though. He had one interception. I know we can't be perfect, but I would really like to trim that down because these games are getting more and more important. So playing clean football is really going to be vital down the stretch. But Oregon just showed that they're here, they're for real. I love being able to say that as a Duck fan because uh, other times where I feel like we've gone down a path, I have question marks, and now I'm seeing a really complete team. Even dealing with injuries, they are still looking complete. And players are stepping up. I mean, I was impressed with Nico Reed, even Savage, is one who's one of our weaker defensive backs, was really able. They had great games. So I really impressed with Oregon with what they're doing. Dan Lanning's doing an exceptional job at coaching this team. It just looks like the place where people want to be. So Oregon pulling out the victory here, Ed. I mean, just continue to keep the same recipe down the stretch. Should hopefully succeed for the Ducks.
Yeah, and it was funny to me watching that game that in the first quarter, in Oregon's second drive, they were already talking about how it was an important defensive drive for Illinois because Oregon is just that explosive to where they can score quickly. And it doesn't matter who they're playing. So you take that recipe, you and they get on the board first. You're anytime that you're playing from behind against that team, you're in for a long day. And the day just kept getting longer and longer and longer for Illinois, just like the season is getting pretty long for everybody else in the Big Ten. Just knowing that they're going to have to face Oregon in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes you wonder: are we going to see a rematch with Ohio State, or is Penn State? I mean, they have a big matchup against Ohio State, so someone's coming out the victor.
We're
So
going to see this week.
yes, we are. I mean, that I feel like that game is going to pretty much anticipate who's going to face off in the pack. Or sorry, not the pack, the Big Ten championship game. No longer the Pac-12, so got to get used to saying that. But excuse me. So yeah, Ohio State against Nebraska didn't look like the Ohio State team that we saw the rest of the year, but that we will definitely be previewing that Penn State Ohio State game. So I just can't help but think when this was the super fast Chip Kelly led team. I remember watching those games where it was like a minute 40 was the drive touchdown. And it was the same thing how the announcers would say going into the second drive. Well, this is big because well, they are high flying. They are a fast team. I mean, look at their last drive. If they score a touchdown here, it's going to be a long game for the defense. So, although it's not as fast paced, it's still a fast paced offense. So, when the announcers were saying that, it was true because Oregon and they jumped out to a 14-0 lead, and it just seemed like from there it was smooth sailing for them.
So, Matthew, let me ask you this question. When it comes to programs, uh, it feels like Oregon is still a program that lives in the world of what Chip Kelly brought to Oregon. as far as an offensive identity for the program, very much like Texas Tech in the air raid. Uh, would you agree with that assessment, or are there any other teams where you kind of feel that same vibe for the program?
I would definitely agree with that. And you could tell Dan Lanning was kind of trying to change that because it always seemed as Oregon, their identity was always going to be quick speed and not heavy, not powerful. And that's why he was saying he wanted to bring that SEC style to Oregon because he wanted to kind of change that identity that yeah, we could still be quick and fast, but I want power. I mean, you look at a Georgia team versus an Oregon team and you're going to see bigger guys. You're going to see stronger uh, linemen, running backs and all that. Oregon's still small, and that's what always worries me is that come playoff time, if we do make it, there's a chance we're gonna have to go against the SEC team, and they're bigger. They're definitely bigger. It's like watching Friday Night Lights and going and playing in the championship game. Those some big boys right there. That Garter team's got some big boys. So, but he's trying to change that identity, and we're seeing that with the recruits. So I agree with what you're saying, Ed, but I do see kind of a slight change in the identity.
Yeah, and another team came to mind while we were talking on that. Michigan.
Yep.
Michigan, their identity as a program has always been to be big, thick, run downhill type of team. Went after Schembechler's uh, and Lloyd Carr's removal from the program, they tried to go that up tempo, fast pace, and it just wasn't the same for that program. They get back to that with Jim Harbaugh. Look what happens last year. They
Yep.
win a national championship. So there, I feel like there are programs out there that are very much not stuck, but their identity as a program feels like they need to fit what their most successful runs and how they came about, what those programs look like at that time, and just update them with whatever coach is brought in to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it may not work, just like it did with Michigan, and you have to get back to your roots where it did work. So there is that. There is those times where it's like that. So I'm glad you brought that up. So we'll see with Oregon. Hopefully, it doesn't hurt them by changing the identity a little bit. But that wasn't the only thing that took place this last weekend. UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi took place as well, and it was an interesting pay-per-view card because of the time difference. Me being on the East Coast, the main card started at 2 p.m. Whereas normally the fights on the East Coast main card doesn't start till 10. I hate it. I hate it so much because sometimes I'm up till 2 a.m. for the final fight. It's like, dude, the East Coast time sucks. It's horrible. I grew up living in the West Coast Pacific time where the fight started at 7 and they ended around 10 something. That's great. All right. But being up till 2 a.m. and also having a baby now, that's brutal. So I enjoy being able to watch it during the day when it took place. So 2 p.m. I'm all for that. So I enjoyed it. It was a good card. It was a really great card. There was a lot of great fights, a lot of fights that were going to create fights for the future. But Ed, total card, there's 13 fights, okay? And on each fight you have a blue corner, you have the red corner. I'm sure you're familiar. You got the same thing with boxing, okay? Of those 13 fights, I'm just going to ask you here. I know you won't know. Just take a guess. Of those 13 fights, how many of those do you think the red corner won?
12.
Damn it. How'd you know? That is exactly right. Yeah. So leading up to the co main event, all all fights the red corner had won going up into the co-main event, which was impressive because how does that happen? Usually the red corner is usually the favorites too. So it was a tough night to be an underdog in this pay per view fight, but I was impressed by hearing that while I was watching it live that the Red Corner had won every bout leading up to the co-main event, where that did end up changing. But the main card was impressive. Sharabolet Magomedov, who led off the uh, main card, had one of the best knockouts you will ever see. If you didn't see it, I urge you to look up the video, look up the replay. But it was a double back fist. I know you're like, a double back fist. This sounds made up, and yeah, it kind of almost is because it's unheard of. I don't think there's ever been a knockout of a double back fist ever before. But leave it to Sharabola Magomedov to do that. He is a tremendous, outstanding striker and just free flow. And the fact that he was even able to do that, he to do that. I mean, the word that I'm looking for is kind of took some guts, because this is the big leagues. This is UFC. To do things like that is kind of crazy, but he did it, pulled off, and got the knockout, which was great. So that was awesome. The third fight into the main card, which was a big one because this here is going to decide who fights for the championship in the light heavyweight division, and that was Magomed Ankalaev versus Alexander Rakic. And just like everyone expected, Ankalaev won it pretty clearly. Rakic, though, he throws some of the meanest leg kicks there is out there. Ed, I don't know if you watch any of these fights nowadays, but when you see these leg kicks, man, they are just, it's clapping. It's gotta hurt, right?
Yeah, I know there are some fighters that train to microfracture their shins enough to where when they are rebuilt, they recalcify to be dense enough to kick through baseball bats. And that's that. As somebody that does not watch UFC on a regular basis, I kind of want to see the big kicks to the face. That's that's
Yeah.
just how it just looks more appealing to me seeing that type of fight than a submission battle. But I digress. A win's a win, no matter how you get it.
Well, it's funny that you say that, Ed, because when you are saying that you would love to see a kick to the face, you think of a kick to a face possibly damaging that fighter's face, whether it be a fracture, crack, whatever. Well, in the co-main event, which is funny because this ended up being a submission win. Hamzat Shemaev is one of the most up and coming fighters. He is undefeated. This guy brings energy. He also brings drama. We've heard of his uh, he missed weight. There was a lot of drama on that on one of his fights. A lot of people disliked him because of that. He has gotten COVID. He got sick so bad that he retired from the UFC, came back, but then he got sick again and was in the hospital, had to pull out of actually their first fight against Robert Whitaker. He had to pull out, so they didn't end up fighting. But when this guy is healthy, he is one of the best fighters on the UFC roster. And Robert Whitaker is no joke. This guy was the number one contender. Robert Whitaker is one of my favorite fighters out there. He is really complete, former champion of the middleweight division. And Hamzat Chimaev made Robert Whitaker look like it was his first fight in the UFC. He immediately went for the takedown, which he often does. He fights very fast paced, which is a bad thing if the fight goes on because he gasses himself. But he has so much confidence in his game that he feels as if it's not going to go out the first round, and most of his fights do not. But he took him down, and he was relentless, continuing to take him down till ultimately he locked in a rear naked choke and submitted Robert Whitaker. But this wasn't the choke that made Robert Whitaker tap. His squeeze was so tight, Ed, that it fractured Robert Whitaker's jaw to the point to where Hamzat Chimaev said that he heard it and felt it as he squeezed, and that's why he tapped. So it wasn't the lack of oxygen to the brain. It was this guy's jaw got fractured just from him squeezing with his arm. So it was not a kick to the head. It was rather yet a submission that was so powerful enough that it cracked his jaw. So Hamzat Chimaev, that is impressive. The fact that you were able to do that, and what a win there. Now to the main event. And Max Holloway, I love Max Holloway. He's one of the most liked fighters on the UFC roster. The Flying Hawaiian himself. There's just so much to like about Max Holloway, from his calm demeanor to being so positive. He's blessed. That's his nickname. The best is blessed. Okay, that's what you'll often hear him say. Well, Ilya Topuria is probably. I talked about Chimaev being one of the most up and coming fighters. Well, Ilya Topuria is that and then some, because he's already there. He's the champion. He knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, which is regarded as one of the best featherweights of all time. And then this was his first title defense against Max Holloway. And a little backstory here: Max Holloway has never, he's been knocked down once in his career. Knocked down, okay? That's not knocked out, knocked down. So he's never been knocked out. Ilya Topuria knocked him out. And this was one of the biggest storylines going into it, because Max Holloway has one of the best chins the UFC has ever seen. To be able to take the punches that he's taken in his career, he's fought the likes of Dustin Poirier. He's fought the likes of Conor McGregor, okay? Some of the best boxers and strikers in the UFC. Well, you never faced Ilya Topuria. Ilya Topuria probably has to have one of the heaviest hands in that division and in the UFC, because he predicted that he would knock him out, which was unheard of because Max Holloway has never been knocked out. And he lived up to that expectation and knocked him out. I had been talking about this for a while with Ilya Topuria. He is one of the most talented fighters I think I've ever seen in the UFC, because he's not just a striker. The guy's a world-class jiu-jitsu. He has a black belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Uh, so great on the ground and great on his feet, and he just showed that he was too much for Max Holloway and knocked him out. So I was impressed with it. I can't think of someone right now that's going to beat him. I know they say that Volkanovski is going to fight him next, and if he does and he beats him again, I would not be surprised if he goes up a weight class, because that's the thing to do in the UFC now. Conor McGregor started it, the first double champion in two weight classes. So it's the thing to do. So he will most likely go up a weight class and fight one of the best that there is right now, and Islam Makhachev. So this was a great UFC card from top to bottom. I enjoyed every bit of it. I watched every single fight on there, and there's going to be a lot to come for the future of the UFC. And Ilya Topuria is the name to keep your eye out on. So, yep, great fights. That was probably the best part of the weekend, because college football was a little bleak. World Series, though, has actually been really entertaining. I will have to say that. I know it's 2-0, so it may seem like it's a dud, but it really isn't, because the games have been close, even though it is 2-0. So keep an eye out on the World Series. I think that things are going to change. I think the Yankees are going to go home, make those adjustments, and do what they need to do. So take a look out on that and expect that to happen. But next week, Ed, we'll have some good games to preview on college football. Am I right?
Oh, definitely. And hopefully we're still talking about has some World Series action, because going back to New York, it's going to be a lot colder there than what they had to deal with in LA. And so that is a factor that some players just aren't ready for when you're talking this high leverage this late in the season, and it just gets that cold and that windy in the Bronx.
Yeah, and we all know pop flies can be home runs in Yankee Stadium too. So
I I think there's a longer fence in my backyard than there is in Yankee Stadium.
yeah, yeah, there's no exaggeration there, because it is true. So, but that's about all we have today, folks. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Continue to please tune in and hit that like, subscribe button, share these videos, and of course, to hit us up in that comment section, in that chat, so we can hear your perspective of things as a fan as well. Because as we all know, fans, we all have different opinions and different perspectives. So we would love to hear from you also. So till next time, guys, we are rounding third. and we are headed for home.